All right, good evening, everyone. Can you hear me in the back? Hiya. Nice to see so many familiar faces and new faces too. Do join us. There's a few chairs up here. It's brilliant to have you all. I feel really emotional. I mean, it's amazing to have so many people here, and I know why that is, and I know it's because so many of us care so deeply about this topic and feel despair and are fed up of seeing horrific images again and again. I was going to try and write a statement, but I've just been with the baby all day, so I didn't have a chance. So I'm just going to speak from the heart and just say, just over a year ago, we organised a silent vigil in Hymes Park, really just to recognise that there were, after the Hamas attacks and the Palestinian attacks, the deaths that were already accumulating. And I knew it would be bad. I knew that a lot of Palestinians were going to die. But I don't think those of us at that vigil could imagine that it would go on for so long, with so many lives lost, with such little regard actually to the hostages, and Netanyahu basically just getting on, just completely ignoring the rest of the world and any attempt to say that this should stop, and nothing. You know, I remember that night actually, because there was a bombing of a hospital, and there was this big rush to say it wasn't Israel, as if Israel wouldn't bomb hospitals. But what has happened since then? How many hospitals, how many schools? And you know, in response, so many of us have spoken out about it, gone to protests. I don't think my soul was ever as crushed as when I was told as a candidate by the Labour Party that I wasn't allowed to go to protests, and we were banned from going for protests. I went anyway, by the way, but it's not a surprise I got applaud. We were born, I feel like we always knew about Palestine, and we were told about it from a very young age. One thing that does give me hope is how many more people now come to protests, and how many people around the world, you know, say how angry they are. The gap between what we the people want and what our governments are doing is so huge. And I always worry that people in Palestine, now Lebanon and other places in the Middle East don't realize that we actually do really care, and they think that the world has kind of forsaken them. And it's really important for us to keep showing them. I'm told that, you know, they do see those images on their phones sometimes. They do know that when the protests are big. But today I was hoping that we could have a conversation, really get into the realities of why the UK is so steadfast in its support, and understanding where that comes from, and the strategic relationship the UK has with many countries in the Middle East. And part of the reason that I really wanted to have this conversation, and Dave and I have been talking about how to do it, was all born also from, you might have seen the clip of me on the Channel 4 News podcast with Thangam Dabiner, who told me, you know, I don't know why people are shouting at the Labour Party, and as if we shouldn't be asking more of our government, and we only send a small percentage of arms to Israel, as if that's okay then. And I think in this moment where so many of us feel like, okay, what can we do next? It's important to go back to the facts, understanding the realities of that relationship, and maybe think again about what we could be doing more of, and what we could do as a collective. And I have a few ideas, and what I want us to do is to have a conversation, probably about 25 minutes with Dave and I, and then to get you guys to just chat to each other for a little while as well, and then come back with questions and some thoughts about actions that we might want to take as a community of people. I do want to say that I'm really proud that the reason that I was blocked was because I was being pushy on Palestine internally in the Labour Party. In this moment, you know, over the last year, so many people have lost work and what have you because of speaking out on this topic. But the last thing we can do is be silent. And it's so important that we speak out. And I do think there's safety in numbers. And I do think that we have to be able to live with ourselves. And so thank you so much for coming today and engaging in this conversation. And it really just fills me with hope to see so many here and that we've run out of seats. Yeah, these discussions are organised at the end of every month. And they're really for those of us that want to lean into understanding the problems of the world. And the last discussion was on public spending. And we're really lucky to have Dave today. We've got Owen Jones coming at the end of November to talk about what next for progressive politics. And I'm sure, again, we will want to talk about Palestine. And then we're going to have a Christmas social. And next year, there's lots of people lined up, including Gary Stevenson, who I know many are a big fan here. So we're going to be talking about all kinds of issues. Really lucky to have Dave as a friend and join us today. And he's an expert on Anglo-Arab relationships and has done a lot of research. Is a lecturer at Sussex University, as you can tell from his job. Proudly.
My work merch.
Dave, can we just start, and I would thoroughly recommend his book, which I was going to bring today to wave around, but I couldn't find it, sorry. Can we just start by telling us, just giving us the headlines so that then we can drill into this. Why does the UK support Israel?
Is that working? No. Is that working? Ah, yes, good. Yeah, I mean, I think the key things that maybe I'll just give you the bottom line up front, as it were. The key thing I want to sort of convey to you guys is that no one is making Britain do this. Britain is doing this for its own strategic reasons. There is no shadowy lobby or, there's no Israel is more powerful than Britain, let alone more powerful than the United States. Britain is choosing to support Israel for its own strategic reasons. The support Britain is giving is really substantive. And these Labour politicians trying to play it down predictably, but they're misleading you in doing that. And to the extent that Britain is choosing to support Israel for its own reasons, and Britain is materially and substantively supporting Israel, that means, and I think this is really the crucial point, it's not just Israeli violence, it's British violence as well, and American violence as well to a particularly high degree, because of the degree of enabling. And in terms of why that would be, if you think about Britain's strategic interests in the Middle East and with regard to Israel, I mean, one of the key strategic interests with regard to the Middle East is oil. These are the energy heartlands of the planet. About half the world's proven oil reserves are in the corner of the Arabian Peninsula, where sort of Kuwait, Iran, Iraq, and Saudi Arabia and the UAE all meet. Huge proportion of the world's gas reserves as well. It's a really, really important strategic area. If you're a great power like the United States and you're struggling against another great power, China, just as it was in the past when the US used to struggle with Russia, Soviet Union, over things like control over energy. Britain's not a great power, but Britain is really invested in the power internationally of the United States. So to the extent that the US wants to project power into the Middle East, the British want to support the Americans in doing that. Sorry, the British, not you, not me. The British government wants to support the American government in doing that. And Israel's role is as a really reliable, contrary to what you hear, a very reliable ally of the West in the Middle East. And not just recently, but going back as far as you like. So Israel gets supported for those reasons. It's a strategic asset in a geopolitically crucial region. And also there's a degree of ideology there in the sense that Israel is seen as a uniquely Western presence in a tough neighbourhood. Or put it another way, I think it was the head of Chatham. I don't want to libel someone. Someone senior, someone told me today, used the words, a villa in the jungle. So this really racialised language, they're Westerners, they're the only democracy in the Middle East, completely false. An outpost of us in a sea of barbaric them. So there's two things, the strategic aspect and that kind of ideological, almost racialised aspect, I think, as well. And we can get into the history of that, of course.
So some of your work as well, David, really looks at the defence industry and just how important is that relationship for the way that the UK then acts for Palestine, but the Arab region?
Yeah. Yeah, it's one key expression, I think, of the wider relationship. I mean, something that Britain has done like for decades in terms of cultivating its allies in the region, whether it's support for Israel, particularly support for Saudi Arabia and the Gulf states, is provide them with the means of violence, providing dictatorships and human rights abusing regimes with the means of violence, the means of repression, the means of survival from their point of view. Britain wants to keep these regimes in power, so it equips them with loads of weapons to help them stay in power, and the US does that even more. So with regard to Israel, it's not the biggest customer of UK arms, that's the Saudis, but Britain does play a quite important role. When you get these conversations with Faiza Shaheen and they say something like that to you, and she'll say, I watched a bit of it, she said something like, it's a tiny proportion of the value of UK arms. I mean, she's just saying what she's been told, I guess. Like, it's a really bad measurement. It's hard, the British government isn't super transparent about the value of arms that it sells. But what we do know is that the British provide a huge proportion of the value of certain weapons systems, which is really important to Israel. So it's not so much that the British provide arms directly to Israel. The British are part of the production process for weapon systems that the Americans provide to Israel. So Apache attack helicopters, F-16 combat aircraft, the F-35, which is a really important one. The Americans make all these aircraft and they do most of the production in the United States, but there's an international kind of supply chain, there's an international production process. And the British are what's called a level one partner, as in outside of the US, no one is doing more to help us build this stuff than the British. The F-35 jet is really important. The British provide 15% of the value of that jet. And this stuff is really, it's not like basic stuff, it's not little nuts and bolts, it's really like high-tech stuff like in the fighter jets, it's the head-up displays above the pilot. In the F-35, so I wrote a couple of things down. For the F-35, it's things like the rear fuselage, the targeting lasers for the bombs, the bomb release cables. And in a production process like that, if the British stop providing those components, like the Americans can't just say, oh, well, we'll magically come up with those components, someone else will provide them. It takes time, to find someone else who can do it, to get them to, produce that stuff. And the thing about, sorry, this is becoming a long answer, the thing about aircraft, combat aircraft in war is that they're hungry for spare parts. They burn through spare parts and components very quickly. So they constantly need that supply of spares. So if you cut that off, you impede their ability to fight. So actually, this stuff is really, really important. The Israelis are due to get a delivery of 36 of these F-35s, and the British are supplying really important components for it. They could just stop that and throw a big spanner in the works. So it downplays what Faiza Shaheen says to you. It downplays the importance of it. And sorry, one final thing. The reason this is important is less because of Britain's support for Israel per se, from the British point of view. What really matters is, for the British, is its relationship with the US. Like that special relationship is absolutely crucial strategically from the British point of view. And what the British don't want to say to the Americans is, you can't trust us not to help you create the means of violence because we might get an attack of the conscience, because we might start worrying about brown people. You can trust us no matter what, even in the middle of a genocide, to keep providing you with this kit and to keep being part of your arms industrial complex. So that's what's going on there, I think.
I mean, it makes me feel sick to think, that is being manufactured here. I'm just thinking there's an election in the US next week. Does this, with a Trump administration, which hard to believe, but could be even worse, on Palestine and Lebanon and the rest of it, and Iran. Do you see any sense of that changing? Is it that the politics, actually who's in charge, doesn't matter? That the actual shady side of this is just the money?
I think, following this for 20 years, I have to say the conversation in the US about Israel is just, it's like night and day, the change that's happened over the past 20 years. In the same way as you would never have seen an AOC or an Ilhan Omar in Congress 10 years ago, let alone 20 years ago. So I think American society is changing. It's producing different kinds of politicians, and it's producing different conversations. Like Ta-Nehisi Coates, this really...
That's happening in civil society and government, though.
And it's slowly, I think, translating to civil society.
I'm not sure I agree.
Not quickly enough to change.
My friends have worked on Cori Bush's, some of the people that got kicked out for being strong on Palestine, Cori Bush, Jamal Bowman. And actually, when you look, when you look at the data of the switch in the number of people in Congress and Senate supporting certain bills, it's not moved. And actually, this does come back to one of the tweets that I was. There's a few Palestine tweets that was pulled out from you. One was boycott, and one was about AIPAC. So, who do spend a lot of money? It was just a study out yesterday on how much they're supporting candidates. And AIPAC, for those of you that don't know, it's not a conspiracy theory.
No, they've got an address. They've got an address.
Yeah, American Israel, Israeli Public Affairs Committee. Sorry, and they provide funding to certain senators and Congress people that support their cause. I mean, it's just like pharmaceuticals or anything else. It's lobbying, right? And what I saw and heard from very senior people in the Labour Party was, we have to look at what's happening in America. So exactly your point. Yeah. We have to look at what the Democrats are saying and what they're doing. And we have to look at the US. So if is the US affected by AIPAC, then we are affected by it as well. So it does come in to some extent.
But what I would say is that it's worth putting... AIPAC exists, and a pro-Israel, organised pro-Israel lobby in the United States exists. It's a fact. It's called AIPAC. It's got an address. It's got publicly available accounts. It is a thing. And everyone but the most disingenuous person understands this perfectly well. And AIPAC's support for certain candidates in elections, to the point where these candidates will be swimming in money versus the opposing candidate, potentially. That is a thing as well, and people have lost seats in Congress because of that. What I think is really important, as well as acknowledging that and the disciplinary role that AIPAC plays in domestic American politics at the level of Congress people, is putting that in the context of the wider strategic picture. So if there was no AIPAC, the US would still support Israel because the US has big strategic interests in the Middle East, and it doesn't need a lobby group to tell it to do that. If you think about the US's particular interests in the region, oil and gas, arms sales, for example, the lobby groups for the oil and gas industry, it's nothing. AIPAC is like this, they're like that, on a graph in terms of the amount of money spent. If you think about...
Well, they're also lobbying, so there's a double thing. Yeah.
And they all, put it this way. If Lockheed Martin, Boeing, ExxonMobil, et cetera, thought that Israel wasn't a strategic asset to the US, AIPAC would be squashed in an instant. And if the US state didn't think, the US government is itself an institution of interest. If it thought that Israel wasn't a strategic asset and AIPAC was trying to push it around saying, no, it is, AIPAC would be squashed in an instant. And indeed, when AIPAC told the US government under Barack Obama, don't sign this nuclear deal with Iran, I don't know if anyone remembers this nuclear diplomacy with Iran, and the US signed this deal, as did the rest of these other Western countries, telling Iran to limit its nuclear technology. AIPAC said, you must not sign this deal, and the American government just ignored them. So I think it's worth, when we talk about these pro-Israel lobbies, the obvious point that these are not Jewish lobbies, they're pro-Israel lobbies, including many people who are not Jewish, they're just right-wing. That's the first thing to say about it. The second thing to say about it is this pro-Israel lobbying is important to a certain degree, If you've lost your job because of them, it's really important, but they don't dictate policy. And one of the reasons I wanted to stress this stuff about the geopolitical value of the region to big powers is so that people can start being able to answer the question, why the hell are our governments supporting this sort of thing? Which is it's the same reason our governments have supported all sorts of violence in the Middle East for decades. Their own strategic interests.
And just on the 30 licenses that were suspended, how did you read that? Because I read that as a sort of gesture to show that they were acknowledging there were clearly human rights abuses, but they didn't really want to do what they should have done, which is to cancel or export licenses. Arms.
Yeah, exactly right. And I mean, number one, if you've been on a march, if you've done any kind of pro-Palestinian activism, to the extent that they did anything, it's because of you. It's not their conscience. It's not their, human decency. It's because of you. It took 12 months for them to consider doing anything like this. And everyone remembers at the beginning, Labour politicians were acting as apologists for all of this. They were saying, you can cut off fuel and water and food, and maybe that's illegal. Well, not maybe that's illegal. We're not going to say whether it's illegal, or we might even say it's fine, it's justified. Starmer said it was justified. The same crimes that the International Criminal Court's chief prosecutor has requested arrest warrants for are the crimes that Starmer said Israel has that right to commit. They went from that to suspending some arms export licenses because they were put in that position by activists, by people running as independents for parliament, whether they got a seat or not. That's pressure, right? I mean, all those NGOs, Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, who were calling Israel out, all those humanitarian organisations who were calling Israel out and naming the crimes it was committing. The ICC chief prosecutor for issuing arrest warrants or calling for arrest warrants, requesting them. After that, they suspend some arms export licenses because they want to send a message that they're doing the right thing. Okay, that's something of a victory, but what did they actually do? They suspended, I think, 10% out of the full suite of arms export licenses that are approved for Israel.
Again, I think there was a Tory MP, well, she just left, or she just got kicked out, but on Newsnight she told me, because she was working with the defence minister, the previous one, she said there was way more than that. Actually.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Because it's like that second, it's like what you're saying about components. And
exactly. So they suspend, is it 30 odd out of 350, something like that. And they say, these are the arms export licenses relating to the specific violence in Gaza. We'll suspend those. We won't suspend anything else. Two things in relation to that. One, Israel is not only violating human rights in Gaza, it violates human rights everywhere there's Palestinians. Two, I bet they're not the only arms export licenses relating to Gaza. Three, they did not suspend what I mentioned before, the indirect supply via the US. They ignored that completely. Or no, rather, they did not ignore that completely. They said that the reason we're not going to suspend those arms export licenses, which are the most important ones, particularly in respect of Gaza, we're not suspending those because we think it would upset our relationship with the US and our role in this arms production sort of complex that we're part of. So they didn't even offer a legal justification for not suspending those arms in relation to what was happening in Gaza. They just ignored Gaza. They effectively said, the subtext is, screw the Palestinians, it would be bad for us if we stop those particular exports, so those exports would continue. I was surprised by how blatant that was, because they've opened themselves up to prosecution, effectively. They've said, we can't be confident the Israelis won't use these arms in violation of international law, but we will continue to provide some, actually most, of those arms indirectly, because to not do so would be bad for us. That feels like a bit of an admission of guilt, which hopefully someone will find themselves in the dock at some point answering for.
So just a final, I guess, thing from me, thinking the way you've laid it out there really clearly, that the way that the UK acts is because of the defence industry and because of our support of the US. Mm-hmm. And you see that massively, like when I was in New York working with UN ambassadors, and the way the UK would just back up the US. I mean, that relationship was second to none. And you see that in the vote. So whereas the US might not veto, they'll abstain, they'll always have the US back. I mean, given that, and given that we don't expect any change in the US position, despite huge protests there, what is it that we can do to put pressure on our government? If those are the things that are really affecting its decisions, and again, I absolutely heard that within the Labour Party, we have to look to the US.
Yeah.
What agency and where should we be putting our energies?
I have ideas. So on arms, I have worked for a long time on and off with a group called Campaign Against Arms Trade, who have taken the government to court many times on UK arms to Saudi Arabia. They're a really good resource, and if you want to get involved with their work or just use them as a resource and look at the information they provide, they can give you lots of really good ideas. For example, these F-35s, there are 79 UK companies involved in the production of those bits and pieces, components that go to the F-35. Campaign Against Arms Trade has a map showing you where those companies are. One of them's in Chelmsford. Now, I've got friends in Brighton who campaign against the factory in Brighton that makes components for these F-35s. That's local activism that people can do. But there's obviously national scale activism that you can do through CAT as well, CAT, Campaign Against Arms Trade. Targeting the British arms sales, that's a key component of Britain's role in this violence, which you can, you go on the Campaign Against Arms Trade website and see what you can do. There's national actions, local actions, there's disruptive actions if you're feeling bold, there's the more sort of polite stay at home and write to your MP stuff. All of it does genuinely matter, so there's things you can do. And look, the British have had a sort of inflated sense of their importance in the international stage, but I think we've overcorrected on that in our minds and started to think Britain doesn't matter. What Thanem Debonair was saying to you was Britain doesn't matter. I mean, this is really nonsense. Think about Britain compared to, like, okay, the country where my mum comes from, Mauritius. Mauritius does not have nuclear weapons. It doesn't have a seat on the Security Council. It's not the 6th largest economy in the world. It doesn't host one of the world's leading financial centres. It's not one of the biggest military powers in the biggest military alliance on the face of the planet. It doesn't sit at the right hand of the superpower. 95% of countries don't. Britain is a really important country in the world system. It's not an empire, it's not a superpower, but it's an important country. And its influence on the US matters. If you can shift British policy, you can impact on American policy. I mean, Britain's more important, arguably, than Israel to the United States. It's certainly a more powerful, bigger, richer, more influential country. So Britain can do something, and we can impact on policies of the British government. So there's a lot we can do, and we shouldn't let these people disempower us by pretending that this stuff is irrelevant, and we shouldn't be protesting to them. We definitely should.
Great, thanks, David. The thing I always tell people is in one of these internal conversations, when I said that you're going to lose the progressive vote, I was told people will forget. And I'm always telling people to don't forget, right? Because the Labour Party is hoping that we forget. They are thinking that we'll forget, which is mind-blowing. And they know, and you're right, that those 30 export licenses was a little bit of a reaction to, oh, Jonathan Ashworth. You know, Wes Streeting almost losing his seat, which would have been brilliant. But yeah, so it's exactly the opposite to what Thanem Debonair was trying to do. And it's perfect for them to say there's no point, right? But actually, we are we are an important country in the world in terms of our position and on this topic, and also the history of this country in involvement in that region and in the creation of Israel and supporting it the way it has expanded territory. So I'm glad to see you all here. I think that's already a sign that you want to do more. Do you want to just take a minute to chat to the person next to you, say hi, talk about any questions? We'll just take 5 minutes to say, one of the things that I really want to do in these sessions is to build community. And the reason I say that is because in all these years of doing politics, I really think that change will come from standing together. And in order for that to happen, having those bonds and knowing each other and caring about each other and knowing that other people have your back is what will drive us forward. As individuals, it can feel impossible. So have a quick chat to the person next to you, and I'm going to stop you in like 3 to 4 minutes, and then we're going to take questions. So be ready. Go ahead. All right, great. I can see that people have been chatting away. Just a couple of quick things. Can I just ask, who's new today? By new, I mean, you didn't come last time and you weren't involved in the independent campaign. Well, welcome, a big welcome to you all, and do tell people to come, and people are always welcome. And just to also say, we're going to leave some time at the end to just chat, because again, I was reading the other day about the radical need for each other in change, and I just think we should do some of that in our practice. And so, you don't have to go to the pub, you can hang around. We don't have to be out of here until 9:30, so we'll have a good half an hour or so for those that can stay to chat. Okay, questions, where do we start? Questions or thoughts on what we can do? Both very welcome. And Sarah's around with the mic. So put your hands up and I'll come round. Yeah, do you want to start here? Hiya.
I've got a burning question. So I hear this narrative all the time. Israel has the right to defend itself. So I've got 2-part questions on this. One is, what does it really mean? And the second part, you mentioned in your monologue that there's no secret lobbying behind the scenes. So how do we hear that all the time across the globe exactly in the same order that Israel has the right to defend itself? So it'd be interesting to find out. That's the question. Thank you.
Okay, maybe second thing first. I mean, you would expect an alliance network of states led by the United States on a big issue to have their talking points worked out, and for that to cascade out through the US, the UK, the French, etc., etc. Number one. I mean, number two, so that's no surprise. That's not like, no one's pulling the strings. Someone in the United States is saying, right, this is the line, and now let's tell our, allies and friends, this is the message, and then our allies and friends will think, well, we want to mirror the US's messaging.
Can I just answer that? Yeah, just to say that I've seen that. Like, I've been in studios with people, and they'll have the lines printed out from, so that's how that happens. So very smart on the communications.
And then, what's the meaning of Israel has the right to defend itself? Let's break that down into two. There's the rhetorical meaning of the way it's used, and then there's the actual sort of, and then talking about it more seriously. The rhetorical meaning is Israel is not the instigator. Israel is the victim. And history started on October the 7th last year. So when people say constantly Israel has the right to defend itself, what they mean is nothing happened before October the 7th last year. Israel was attacked out of the blue and Israel is defending itself. Other people attack Israel, Israel defends itself. That's a classic formulation. And all the analysis on British media output on Israel-Palestine going back decades will show you that is always the framing, no matter what the facts are. And Israel was attacked really seriously on October the 7th. But no matter what the facts are, that will always be the sequence. And history will always be cut off the day before something the Palestinians did. what does Israel have the right to defend itself really mean? Like, to people who aren't trying to be rhetorical, but to approach that thought in a serious way. I mean, all states have the obligation to defend their citizens from physical threat. That's definitely true. The question is how. And if you take seriously the fact that history didn't start on October the 7th, and this goes back a really long time, what would be the best way of ensuring the genuine right of Jewish Israelis to have safety and security? It would be to make peace with the Palestinians and have some kind of settlement, whether it's, and it's none of my business, it could be a two-state settlement. People say that's impossible. Okay, fine. As I say, it is none of my business. It's up to Palestinians to decide what their liberation looks like, and it's up to Palestinians and Israelis to agree, not in a lopsided way, but to genuinely agree what their coexistence looks like. Two states, one state, whatever. But if you have genuine equality, then you have genuine security and genuine safety for everyone. That would be a good way for Israel to defend itself. Israel could have defended itself in 2002 when the entire Arab League offered it full normalisation and full diplomatic recognition simply if it withdrew to its legal borders and gave a just resolution to the refugee issue. Not even all the refugees get to return to their homes. Just a just resolution or an equitable resolution. Going back to its legal borders, i.e. keeping 78% of what the Palestinians consider rightly to be their ancestral homeland. It's the ancestral homeland of both peoples, not just one. So Israel could have, that was a generous offer from the Palestinians in particular, from their point of view. We'll give you 78% of our historic homeland. We don't even demand that all the refugees get to go home. We'll just have two states on those boundaries, and you can have full diplomatic recognition. And what did the Israelis do? They didn't even consider it, didn't talk about it. That's still on the table from the Arab League, 22 years later. And it's not the only example. At any point, they could have just left the occupied territories. No one's forcing them to stay there. And of course, if there isn't an apartheid state, if there isn't a state of apartheid, if there isn't a state of occupation, if there isn't a state of repression, then what's the chances of these paramilitary groups, A, forming at all, or B, if they do form, doing anything in terms of recruitment? If people are living happy lives, independent lives, equal, prosperous, safe, secure, why would they want to join a paramilitary group? So there's many ways to defend yourself, and one is just not creating the conditions that are bound to produce groups like Hamas, and not effecting your own forms of terrorism, etc., which are bound to produce those effects.
Great, okay.
Hi, Paul Burden. Mike, you've sort of started to skirt around the question I was going to ask, which is, if we are going to withdraw our answer, can we move towards recognising Palestine? I know people argue that you can't recognise a country until you've got its borders, but I think you can actually recognise that a state should exist and then have the argument about where exactly its borders are. And we could do that in the same way that Norway and Ireland have done, without completely pissing off our neighbour or our friend across the water.
Is that easier to do than the defence stuff, I guess, is the...
It's all doable. If you can't recognise a state whose borders are undefined, Israel doesn't define its borders, does it? You know. I think you're absolutely right. It's one of the main things they should do. I had a little list of what the UK government should do, what a Shaheen government would do. A Shaheen government would do all sorts of things. Here are some of the things the Shaheen government would do. Recognition of a Palestinian state and recognition of a Palestinian state's full equal rights to be part of the state system. So not the state that Palestinians have been offered by the Israelis, which is not a state, it's a Bantustan, where the Israelis have the right to go in whenever they like, when the Israelis have control of the borders, or control of the airspace, and the Palestinians uniquely aren't allowed to have a military, but the Israelis are. That's a generous offer that pro-Israeli people will tell you that the Israelis made to the Palestinians. Recognition of the Palestinians' right to a state, a full state, an equal state with the same attributes as an Israeli state, notwithstanding the occupation, I think you can recognise that. If your idea is a two-state solution, which, as I say, I have no opinion on, but if you want to pursue that, recognise the state now and say, yeah, there is a state and it's occupied, but we recognise its right to, we recognise that it should exist. And we want to give it diplomatic relations. Some of the other things you were going to do, by the way.
Haven't read these.
You're going to impose a two-way arms embargo because Britain buys arms from Israel, which it markets as battle-tested on Palestinians. The main drone that the British Army uses, the Watchkeeper drone, is produced by the Israelis, which it is battle-tested in the occupied territories. And not only should Britain be effecting that two-way arms embargo, it should be announcing loud and clear, trumpeting it from the rooftops, not doing what David Lammy did, which is virtually apologising for suspending some arms sales. It should be proudly saying, we're doing this because this state is committing war crimes and crimes against humanity. Sanctions on the likes of Netanyahu and Gallant include similar to the ones that have been effected on Putin and his senior officials. And targeted sanctions, including asset freezes on Israeli individuals and entities involved in the occupation as well, aside from Gaza. So there you go, there's your policy programme. Sorry, I didn't ask you if you agreed with any of it.
Agree. Okay, let me take 3 in one go, because I can see loads of hands going up now. Sarah, do you want to just start from the back and work forward? Yeah.
Hi. I guess just thinking about the role of Britain's own strategic self-interest in why it's not doing anything in the face of genocide. I mean, I guess there's 2 parts of the question. One is there's obviously also impacts of this that will affect other aspects of Britain's strategic self-interest. That this leads to instability, it's leading to oil price speculation, there's the looming spectre of a conflict with Iran. I suppose I'm kind of asking how those weigh up and could that change in the future, especially just Israel seems kind of so out of control on so many fronts, and they're attacking UN security forces. I mean that's the question.
Hello, I'm hoping you can comment on practical things that we can do. In the past year, I think a lot of us have been boycotting, using apps like No Thanks and Disoccupied, and just religiously boycotting and how effective that is. But I think the other we have quite a lot of savings and money collectively, and I feel like that is where we have the most power. And a lot of the banks fund weapons companies. So, I mean, I've moved my money out of HSBC into a more ethical bank.
Yeah.
And my latest challenge is what to do with the money I have in a pension, because I've been searching for ethical pensions, and even if they're ethical, because they don't invest in weapons, they will invest in Tesla and Microsoft and in all the big tech companies, and even if they are slightly ethical, they'll be managed by BlackRock or HSBC, and I don't know what to do.
Yeah.
So I feel like that's a really big area for me right now, is that's really millions of dollars that we have the power to maneuver if we actually really do things collectively. So what?
Sorry. We weren't meant to have someone from BDS today, but I've got some thoughts on that, and we couldn't make it in the end. But yeah, do you want to take this one more question? Oh, okay, yeah.
Hi, I just wanted to ask, do you think there is a strong Israeli financial lobby in British politics and British politicians? And if so, how do we disrupt that?
I'll go backwards through those. Is there a strong Israeli financial lobby in the UK? No, there isn't. And the British, there's a pro-Israel lobby in Britain, but it's pretty feeble compared to the one in the US. There are groups I can't remember what BICOM stands for. British Israel something something something. I mean, look, I've been involved in this stuff for 20 years. If I don't know what BICOM stands for, it can't be that important. I would know. This is my specialist subject, you know. Well, at least British foreign relations in the Middle East is my specialist subject. Was it UK lawyers for Israel or something who, again, these are smallish groups which throw their weight around in British civil society, and anyone who's had their reputation besmirched, or you know, who's been portrayed unfairly or had their activism attacked or whatever, I'm not diminishing that or belittling that. It's bad for you personally and for your comrades and for your struggle, and I get that, and I'm not trying to play that down, but these people do not dictate policy. They don't. There's no one's telling the British government what to do, and certainly not, you know, a small state with a population the size of like London plus Birmingham maybe. That's just not how it works. And the reason I'm trying to give you this geopolitical picture is to get us away from why does Britain do it? It must be some kind of influence on Britain. Let's get away from that kind of calculation, because it's not true. And I mean, there's obvious reasons why, you know, those narratives are adjacent to tropes which people are genuinely have a reason to be concerned about us propagating. And, you know, we can avoid that stuff, accidentally stumbling into saying something that's problematic, which I'm not saying you've done, but we can get close to that if we don't have the full geopolitical picture, and we can avoid it if we do, I think. Yeah, Britain's not doing it because of lobbying. There is pro-Israel lobbying, but it's not financial lobbying, and it's not, you know, controlling or... Yeah, again, there's Labour friends of lots of things. Yeah, sure, but it doesn't dictate policy, you know, and there would be no Labour friends of it. Look, Britain supports Saudi Arabia to the exact same extent as Israel, and there's no, you know, people don't talk about Britain being pushed around by a pro-Saudi lobby within the House of Commons. That's not how these things work. It matters to a degree. It's mid-level disciplinary stuff, which is tough for the people who have that lobbying pointed against them, but it doesn't dictate policy. Okay, what can we do? Maybe Faiza's got some thoughts on that. I don't know much about. I do the analysis stuff, and other people do the activism stuff. So don't ask me. But like, I think one important principle is any boycotting you do as a person should be part of a big collective effort, because it's like ethical consumerism, isn't it? Like, that's a distraction. One person's own decision, I'm not going to do this because I think it's wrong. But if you do it as part of the collective thing, like there's a campaign that says I should take my money out of X and put it in Y, and you do that, that's really powerful. If there's a BDS campaign that says take your money out of whichever bank and bank with this other bank, and you're part of that, that's massive. So it's just that general principle I would emphasise. And then the first question, sorry I came to you last when you were first, was...
the strategic interests.
Oh, yeah.
The kind of hierarchy of...
Yeah. And Israel being out of control, like, I know I don't want to pick on a phrase you've used because it's perfectly, it's just a colloquialism, but just to get the point across, Israel is exactly within control. It's just that the US does not care about this stuff, and all that talk about we're very concerned, and any minute we'll have a ceasefire deal sorted out, just you wait, and Israel shouldn't do that, or they, you know, that's for our benefit, that's PR. If they wanted it not to happen, it wouldn't happen. If they wanted Israel not to be going into Lebanon and pulverising Lebanon, and specifically terrorising Lebanon, Netanyahu saying, if you don't want your country to end up like Gaza, fight a war for us against Hezbollah, i.e. go back to the Lebanese civil war on our behalf, please, or we'll turn your country into Gaza. That is terrorism. That's straightforward terrorism. And he's got the green light from the Americans who are providing the arms to effect that campaign of terrorism. So it's within those parameters. It's in control. And in terms of the costs and benefits, I think the US and the British have a different calculus from the Israelis. They've got different political calculus. The British have to think about pro-Palestinian activism. They have to think about poor old John Ashworth and his glittering political career coming to a tragic end. Wes Streeting luckily still being there, thank God. They have to worry about stuff like that, but the Israelis don't. So the Israelis can afford to be a bit more gung-ho. And notwithstanding the fact, I mean, look, the left in America have had some setbacks in recent years, but there is a broad tectonic shift towards the left in American politics. I don't think that's deniable, you know. They've had setbacks, but overall...
Apart from Trump.
You know, yeah, but still, I mean, Trump's a reaction to that. You know, it's a struggle between those two forces, and there's a really positive left-wing force and a really positive pro-Palestinian force coming through in a way that just wasn't 20 years ago. So the Americans do have to think about that to a degree. So the cost-benefit analysis for the US, the British, the Americans will be different, and they all disagree amongst themselves. But this is disagreement amongst accomplices to war crimes. This is disagreements amongst parties to the crime about how best to effect the crime from their own different points of view. But they're all fundamentally agreed on the crime.
I'm just going to say something on BDS. So as I said, I think it was like 2015, I retweeted something from BDS on what goods to boycott. And it was in the list of tweets that were used against me. It was one of the ones that was there. And you will know that BDS is sort of painted in this shady light and, you know, banned from certain places and the rest of it because it works. Boycotting can work, and they're worried about boycotting, divestment, sanctions, because it has worked historically. I mean, the Telegraph wrote some mad article about me because I said, of course, that's a way that people should support Palestinians. I mean, it's what happened with South Africa. So, you know, do it. I really do want to emphasize that. Go to the BDS site, look at what goods we should be boycotting, look at where you should move your back. Do it and really be committed to it. And like Dave said, don't just do it on an individual basis, like do it loudly, do it as part of something. And it makes them really nervous. Hence why they act like it's wrong to talk about BDS, which is incredible, really. And just to, I know we have some people here that were involved in pushing Wolf and Forest Council, for instance, to divest. Literally going around door knocking in an area where, and the leader of the council's seat and the rest of it, the wards, to make them feel nervous so that they knew they had to vote one way or, you know, the right way when it came to the council meeting. Those are the sorts of things that we can do. Look at where your company or whoever you work for is investing. I'm at London School of Economics. I'm really proud of the students for looking at where LSE is putting their money and pushing back, and a number of us staff are involved in that as well and want to support as much as possible. So I do want to emphasise how important that is. And I think it was back in September, my sister, I'm going to let my sister talk about this. She's one of these that 20 years ago was going around putting stickers on goods in like different shops. Saying, don't buy this, boycott. So she can say a little bit about, I did see avocado, by the way, avocados in Waitrose the other day. Do just check all of those things and tell them I'm not buying this because I can see where it's from. Yeah, so Nadia, do you want to say something on this?
Yeah, I mean, it is part of the collective, but it's also about feeling your own sense of responsibility. The collective is really important, but it's also about your own ethics and how you feel about things. You have to sit with what you eat and what you drink and what you're reading, and you know, I think every bit of action that you take is also about your own resistance to something as well. I was going to say about the pensions, that's a really important one. I think we really have to question our workplaces, where they're investing, and if there's a collective, I mean, you can do days of actions, and there is one that is coming up actually where we're trying to get everyone up and down the country to do a day of action in their workplace. Find the people that are also feeling the same as you and organise. I think organise is a really key issue. I was also going to say about the DSEI. So Twickenham, they've been having arms fairs. And a collective has been like writing letters to Twickenham Stadium where they're holding the arms fair,
and it was cancelled. I mean, obviously it took a lot more than just writing letters. It took defacing and taking like some direct action as well. But we need to think about next year, 2025, in September, when we've got DSCI just down the road at Excel, who are coming, selling those tested weapons that you spoke about, David. You know, we've got Albert and we've got Raphael arms being sold, and we need to really now, Ghana, we need to start now. We need to start ASAP and start like rallying people and getting them to know about what is going on. They literally have like warships sitting in the waters there. I mean, it's disgusting. It's uncomfortable, and this is happening on our doorstep. Let's do something. I know that PSC have already started asking people to write letters. They've even got a model letter that you can use. You just have to go on their website. They've just released it last week. But I think we need to do a lot more than write letters. So let's get together and think about what we can do.
Okay, thank you. Just on that, and just to say it does work, because if you think about just a good example, there's the Hay Festival, the Hay Literary Festival. They had to, they basically had one of the sponsors, a lot of, people put pressure on some people going to speak, and they started pulling out, and then the Hay Festival said, we don't want money from you anymore. So it can work, but we do have to spread the word. And just to say, a friend of mine who's Israeli and very pro-Palestine, I was talking to him a few weeks ago and just like, what can we do? Is it working? And he said, actually, divestment, boycott, it does work. There's companies pulling out of Israel, and we don't hear this, you know, but it is making them feel isolated, and so we have to keep going. And so don't let them tell you there's no point. I think that's the ultimate thing, you know, that we have to just keep going and upping our efforts even. Okay, so let's take a few more questions, and then we'll leave a bit of time to round up at the end. Yes, come. Yeah.
Hi. By way of introduction, I think Faiza and I belong to the same club of deselected people. I was deselected in 2012 as a councillor in Edinburgh Redbridge after 20 years of service. The question that the gentleman asked about borders, I'm 79, so I can remember Resolution 242, the United Nations Security Council resolution, which already made a demarcation instructing Israel to go back to the 1967 borders. So that is already there. It's just that the resolutions haven't been implemented and the world doesn't give a damn.
Yeah, thank you. I have a slightly different question. My relatives in Israel have changed their tack after a year of the war. They're scared. They are looking where to move in the world, and they're joining some protests. So the question really is, are there active groups within Israel that are worth supporting?
And Andrew at the back, Sarah?
Yeah, I was going to say briefly on BDS. We just at our Unite branch in my workplace just passed a motion and used branch funds to get a leaflet made that we'll distribute on the desks of everyone at work to remind them, because you might notice people at work who are buying stuff that, you know, is on the boycott list, and you don't necessarily want to go up to them and be like, hey, you're doing something really evil or whatever. You might want to like gently say it to them and give them a leaflet so that they have the information. So I think going through union branches is really worthwhile. My question is, Donald Trump said tonight that he's going to have an all-out war on Keir Starmer. How do you think that will impact? How do you think that will impact Labour government's position on Israel? Do you think it's going to split from the US but continue being pro-Israel? What does that look like?
Great question, thanks, Andrew. And there was one more at the back, I think, there? Yeah.
I'm not entirely sure, but I think today was the deadline for South Africa to submit their evidence for the genocide case. of course our government is letting us down, the media is letting us down. How reliable do you think the ICJ could be in terms of resolving this?
Right, okay. ICJ first. These judges come under, like, courts aren't separate from the world, and judges can come under pressure. We heard that the former chief prosecutor of the International Criminal Court was subject to threats from the Israelis, serious threats. You don't want to pursue this, think about your family, that kind of thing. So there's that. The other thing is, with genocide, think about genocide as, in terms of how it's defined in the law and how it's defined in scholarship, for example. I was reading this really interesting article in New York Times a few weeks ago, basically saying that the guy who coined the term genocide would probably have been quite disappointed, well, in fact was quite disappointed with the way it ended up being codified legally, which is quite tight, where you have to show intent, you know. And intent may look obvious to us, but we're not judges, you know. That's not the balance of, that's not the burden of proof, you know. So it may be that I'm not particularly confident they'll find it's genocide. That's not me saying I don't think it is. I think the burden of proof is really quite high. One of the reasons the South Africans pushed it is because they had all these statements from the Israelis, like they were too stupid to keep it to themselves. And so in the first few days, after October the 7th, they were saying all this stuff, you know, which is super incriminating. And if you look, I don't know if you've looked at the case that the South Africans brought, there's pages of just blood-curdling, genocidal, in my mind, language. But I think it will hinge on that. It's quite a tight definition. That thing, David, did you see David? Was it David Lammy said today? That if we talk about it in terms of genocide, we're trivialising or we're playing down the gravity of the term genocide because genocide means millions of people. It's got nothing to do with numbers. It's not about numbers. It's not the thing. It's about, well, we know what the definition, presumably you guys know the definition, the intent to destroy in whole or in part an ethnic group. I mean, the Srebrenica massacre was one of the few things that has been found to be genocidal under international law, and that was, what was it, 40,000 people? So, yeah, there's the politics of it, but I think, yeah, we'll see about that. I think the Trump-Starmer thing, it's just politics at the moment. They want to accuse the Democrats of foreign interference. I'm sure he'll drop that, and it'll be the same, you know, transactional relationship that he tends to have with Western states.
And I mean, also, what about the Labour Party, right? Because the one thing I was asked when I was on TV last week was, you know, essentially, that I was saying that this doesn't mean Trump can do what he wants. I don't think that Starmer's suddenly going to be like, right, okay, they've given us license to do what we really want to do, which is to not back the US and support the Palestinians. Do you want to? I think that's kind of the question, right? Yeah.
I was talking to someone in the US earlier today, actually, about precisely this. The way in which he was talking about the way in which Lammy has been sidling up to the Republicans, talking about how much he has in common with J.D. Vance. These people are fascists. I'm not saying Lammy is, I'm saying that they're straightforwardly fascists, right? I think everyone's finally coming to terms with that. I just think it will resonate with those of you who were around 20 years ago, when those of us who opposed the Iraq war were accused of being appeasers. But the same people now who are saying, well, obviously we have to maintain a relationship with the United States. Well, even if it's run by white nationalists, obviously we have to maintain a relationship with Germany. Can you imagine? The Labour Party back then were the people who said, no, we shouldn't be appeasing fascism. The Labour Party now, I mean, it is appeasement, it seems to me. The fact that they take it as just taken as read, we have to have a relationship with them. It tells you everything, doesn't it? Yeah, anyway. Groups within Israel worth supporting. I mean, I think the obvious ones that come to mind are B'Tselem, the human rights organisation in Israel, which is really, really good and frank about what the government's doing. Breaking the Silence is a really good group which gets like the voices of dissident former IDF troops into the public domain so they can speak out about what they've seen. But I mean, I'm not an expert on Israeli politics, but those are the two ones that immediately spring to mind. It's tragic the way the Israeli left has shrunk. Absolutely tragic. Like, thousands of people went into the streets to protest against the invasion of Lebanon 40 years ago. And now it's just, it's something dark is happening in the political spectrum of that country. But there are people there who are, you know, who are standing up against it. They're super brave and we should support them.
Yeah.
And there's a couple of things I just wanted to quickly mention. What your sis was saying about the arms fair. Again, Campaign Against Arms Trade do loads of work on that. They always protest it, and they do really good, like, you know, teach-ins on at the gates of the arms fair, and it's a good, like, educational moment. Let's use this arms fair as an opportunity to raise people's understanding of Britain's role in these kind of things. So, yeah, look at what CAT are doing on that. And just one quick thought I had about, because the question of the lobby keeps coming up, Israel lobby, all that kind of thing. I think it's worth thinking of pro-Israel lobbies as pro-West lobbies as well. Like, if you're Joe Biden or if you're Keir Starmer or Rishi Sunak, these pro-Israel lobbyists are doing good work for you, right? They're bullying all the people who are protesting your foreign policy. It's great from the point of view of a British politician or an American politician if there are pro-Israel groups who are weeding out progressives from Congress who are, you know, giving activists a hard time for protesting against genocide. That's great. And remember that, I mean, if you look closely, I'm not going to name any names, but if you look closely on the pro-Israel, the particularly pro-Israel people, you will find on the right of the Labour Party who are also very close to the British arms industry, because there's a perfect, you know, correlation of interest. The British arms industry must love the idea that people who are against British arms sales can be attacked, smeared, whatever, by pro-Israel lobbyists. They're not an external, this is the thing, Israel isn't external to the West, and these lobby groups are not external to British and American politics. They're part of the ecosystem, and they do a good job, by no means not just for Israel, also for the British state, the British arms industry. So, you know, that helps us get even further away from this idea of a, you know, a pro-Israel lobby pulling the strings, as it were.
To what extent is this actually led or ruled by straightforward racism as opposed to just financial interest?
It's not financial interest so much as it's the geostrategic interests of states, number one. And then there's some economic interest for arms sales and, you know...
But they wouldn't do it... how much, you know, the point about racism I think is really important, because they do it because they value those lives less. There is an element of...
Yeah. I think it's really important. I'm glad you asked that. I think it's really important to hold those two things in mind. There's material interests in the power of the British state, the power of the West, the geopolitical power of the West, Western economic interest broadly defined. And then there's this ideological thing that holds it together, isn't there? And there's this sense that, and Israel really benefits from this sense that Israel is part of Western civilization against the barbarians. And that just taps quite viscerally into the sort of things, the sort of ideology that Joe Biden was brought up believing, the sort of thing that Keir Starmer believes, no doubt, in his bones. This idea that Israel was created on a desert. There was a wasteland populated by barbarians, and then Israel was established. I'll close this answer with this example, which I think is telling. Harold Wilson, former British Prime Minister, once described Israel as a country created by social democrats who made the desert flower. I think those were more or less his exact words. Who made the desert flower. This is the classic settler colonial mentality. This place was inhabited by barbarians, whether it's Australasia, whether it's North America, and then we came along and made the desert bloom. This goes right back to John Locke's idea of what counts as property. They're not using it, you could use it, so get rid of them, claim it, and do what you want with it. Keir Starmer quoted that a couple of years ago. As Harold Wilson said, the early Zionists were social democrats who made the desert flower. It's fantastically racist. It's viscerally racist towards Palestinians. And notice how, as all racisms, there's two sides of it. There's the people who have been denigrated, and there's the people who are being exalted. There's the people who have been designated as them, and the people who are counting as us. That's super important, and I think that solidifies that geopolitical relationship by putting it into a much more visceral level of who's us and who's them, who's got the right to have self-determination, and whose place is it simply to get out of the way and die if necessary because your lives are worth less. It's their ancestral homeland, and it's for them to get out of the way. That kind of thing. I think that does play a part for sure.
I know when we hear these things, it's really upsetting, but use that anger. I think sometimes we think like as anger of a bad thing, but use that anger and let it fuel you, because what's happening is so wrong on so many levels, and it is driven by racism, among other things. I just was thinking also in terms of what gives me hope, and we saw it in the UN General Assembly in September as well, is that because people know it's racism. When I was in New York, Russia invaded Ukraine, and my boss kept taking me into loads of meetings with ambassadors, I think because she thought a lot of countries were really angry with the way the US was behaving, the UK was behaving, because they were putting lots of pressure on countries to vote against Russia, which many countries were saying, of course, this is wrong. But they said, why is there this double standards now when we asked for you? And I remember going in to speak to the Jordanian ambassador. He was like, when we asked for support on Palestine, we don't get anything. Saying now that this is illegal, what about what you did in Iraq? And it really kind of, at that point, it was really kicking off. And it was really noticeable to me, because my boss would take me in because she thought I'd taken this Muslim with me, and it gives me cover and allows me to have these conversations with people. But we went to so many different ambassadors' offices over those weeks, and the anger was palpable. And what that anger was doing for a number of global South countries, and big countries as well, important countries, was making them turn away more from the US and UK and all kinds of things, including like borrowing money, and more towards China and Russia, which has its own problems too. But there is a global shift happening. So it's, we do have to do our part here, but a lot of countries aren't just taking this, and they are thinking about how they better organize at that global level, and not just in terms of UN votes, but in terms of their development. And so I wonder, I kind of hope that there will be something. I know we kind of get annoyed at a lot of Arab countries for not supporting Palestine and not standing up, but a lot of countries around the world are seriously rethinking their relationship with the UK and the US and others that support Israel because of what's happened over the last few years, and the very clear double standards that we can see. So just keep that in mind, that we're doing what we can here, and in other parts of the world people are also acting. Yep. And that together, right? That together, and keeping that hope alive, and keeping the energy up, and keep going to protests and boycott and divestment. And I absolutely love the idea. I mean, use your trade union, but if you don't have a trade union, please still print out the list of companies and go in early and leave it on everyone's desk. And there are a lot more people thinking about this. I think one of the things that really struck me, what happened to me in the Labour Party, that was done on purpose because of my position on Palestine. Let me just be clear about that. I know why it happened, I know who instigated it, and I know that was also because I believe in public ownership of water, so those things combined made me a problem. But actually the way that people understood what was happening, the thousands and thousands of emails I got after I did that Newsnight interview, and the amount of people that still every day come up to me and recognize that actually what happened was wrong, and we need people to be speaking up on Palestine. And that, don't think you're on your own. I mean, we've seen how many people come out today, but there are so many people out there in every walk of life. Someone I was in a TV studio the other day, the makeup woman said it to me. Every walk of life can see what's happening is wrong. And we do need to reach out to those people and know there's things they can join and action they can take. And as this goes on and is becoming more and more horrifying, and it's important for us to take that on ourselves, to do that work. And it's coming up to 9. If there's any urgent last things that anyone feels like they want to say. On my part, okay, yeah, go on.
Oh, thank you.
Oh, Rosa. Hi, Rosa.
Hi, Faiza.
Rosa is a counsellor in this area, and she went independent to support me, which I really appreciate.
My question is about the United Nations. They're not getting the support from governments. And as a Colombian born, I'm very proud that Colombia broke all relations with Israel on day one. But everybody else seems to be silent. The fact that Netanyahu seems unstoppable. Antonio Guterres has, we know what Antonio Guterres has said to Netanyahu, but the fact that even the UN soldiers have been murdered, killed, and I wish that other governments would follow suit to what Colombia has done, but everyone's just silent. What's happening there? What is going on? The UN used to be very powerful. They used to be there to protect us all, and suddenly it's become very weak, in my view. I stand to be corrected. Thanks.
Thank you, Rosa. I mean, I think there is a broad problem with the UN, but I would say is that a lot of countries aren't being silent. It might feel like that from here, but they are moving towards building different blocks within the UN, and it is because of what's happening. And they are, even like I say, in the way that they're borrowing money and thinking about their development, they are, some big countries, right, are changing their behaviour because of what's happening. Do you want to say something on this? But I take your point. The UN has been, it's been unable to really do anything. I mean, how many times Antonio Guterres puts up a statement? I think his most recent one, he sounds really desperate, but he's just like, for humanity, please. But
I mean, the UN is different ways to describe it, but it's not a state, is it? It's a forum where states come together, which is only as effective as those states want it to be, and if key states don't want it to be effective, then it won't be. Or maybe it is effective in the sense that it gives cover to Israel to do what it wants. You can describe the UN Security Council in that way. There are some bodies within the UN that are discredited by virtue of the way the states behave within it. The UN Human Rights Council has, anyone that seems to be able to sit on the UN Human Rights Council, including like Saudi Arabia maybe at one point. On the other hand, there's the UN bureaucracy and the UN staff and the UN agencies and the UN special rapporteurs and the UN experts who are absolute heroes. And they're not a powerful state, so we can't expect them to change things. But what they, in terms of forcing change on states, but what they can do is change the environment politically and send messages to global civil society. They can collect the information that global civil society needs to campaign on these issues. The special rapporteurs, the experts, the agencies do that. Researchers like me, human rights organisations, we depend on their work, and it's really important. And when you think of the humanitarian work they do as well, the reason Israel hates UNRWA so much is because UNRWA helped the Palestinians to survive as a people, prevented the Palestinians from being scattered to the four winds, helped them to survive in their homeland to some degree. That's why the Israelis hate them so much. So when we talk about the UN, there's bits that need to be fixed, and it's in the gift of states to fix them. But there's other bits that work as well as they can do, on their own terms, and which, deserve, our applause, I think.
Like UNICEF and just adding credibility and things that you can quote because it comes from them, on the ground.
Any idea how this is all going to end?
I'm sorry?
Any idea
how this is going to end? Dave.
No.
David.
I don't know. It's just...
Well, I mean, I think,
Until this war, you expect the standard kind of a few weeks of carnage, lots of protest, and the Americans at some point say, okay, game's up, this is costing us too much politically, you've done whatever you were going to do, pull the plug, and the Israelis say, okay, we could have fought for longer, but, Daddy's told us to put our toys away, so, that's the classic dynamic. This is different, this is new. And they seem, I think, unfortunately, there are people in and around the Biden administration who think this is good for us strategically. Iran's allies are getting a good old kicking. Iran is getting weaker. In this vital strategic area, our adversaries are getting weaker. Our attack dog is mauling them. And it's costing us a bit politically, but overall we're ahead. So let's allow it to continue.
Even if the Democrats, if say it comes down to Michigan, where they've lost a big Muslim vote.
Yeah, exactly. They seem to think they can get away with it. They seem to think if you put all those things in the mix, those risks.
Well, I know. I mean, that was exactly the calculation that the Labour Party made. When I asked about that, they were like, they will forget, and anyway, we're going to win a big majority. So.
What an epitaph for the American Republic that will be. The last election was lost because centrists couldn't stop doing genocide. What an epitaph that would be for Western democracy.
I mean, I genuinely think it will only end with us. It will end with people putting pressure on their governments and people not forgetting what's happening and people standing up globally with the Palestinians and others, in Lebanon and elsewhere. I mean, let's see where it spreads. So thank you for coming today. I think on my part, how many people... if you're local, I mean, it's deeply frustrating we still have Ian Duncan Smith. I was thinking, and I'm going to hang around for a bit, but I was thinking people tell me they write to Ian Duncan Smith about this all the time and just ignores them, doesn't reply. If we want to do something locally, I'm happy to organise in whatever way that might be, organise for thousands of letters directly to Keir Starmer saying, seeing as you took away our ability to have the person we wanted, let's actually directly tell you what we want. I'm happy to listen to any ideas that you have and to come and talk to me about that or email me if that's easier. Thank you so much. I didn't know how many people were going to come today, and it's incredible to see you. Please come again, bring people with you. And they are really scared of this. They're really scared of grassroots organising. They're really scared of just everyday people engaging. And so this is rebellion, This is actually rebellion. And I know it doesn't feel like that sometimes, but it is. So just to say, Mick is reminding me there's these leaflets that hopefully some of you have got. If you've got one, don't take another one, because apparently you've only got 100. There's about 100 people here, just under 100 people here today, which is incredible. And when I used to say people care about Gaza, they used to say to me in Labour London Regional Office, they used to tart and be like, Faiza, come on, in Chinkford with the Green. Owen is joining us, and I'm sure we'll come back to this topic, but we're going to kind of more broadly look at what next for progressive politics, a little bit of a review of the year, and he'll be here on Monday, 25th November at 7:30. So come back, bring friends, we'll try and get more chairs. Let's keep growing and let's stick together. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you, Dave. Sorry, I didn't even... Thank you. We are so lucky to have Dave join us, and I'm so lucky that you're my friend. And having your knowledge is incredible. And what's the best way for people to keep in touch with you and what you're writing about? I know you've got a new book that you're working on.
You can email me at Sussex. I don't use social media, so you'll hear from me.
Okay. You can email me and I'll forward it to him. Okay. All right. Great. Okay. Thank you, everyone. Stick around if you can. And if you have to go, see you again soon. Thank you.